A country in South America is attempting something that sounds almost impossible. Bolivia, a nation facing one of the most severe environmental crises on the planet, has announced plans to transform massive stretches of scorched earth back into thriving forests. We're talking about recovering an area larger than some entire countries. The scale of this project is staggering, but what makes it even more extraordinary is what happened just a few years ago. The disaster was enormous. Headlines flashed images of smoke, landscapes aflame and communities displaced. Yet soon the world looked away. Ecosystems collapsed. Wildlife disappeared and lives were swept up in fire. But Bolivia didn't forget. Now they're fighting back with a plan to reshape the future of an entire ecosystem by turning its drylands into a green paradise. But could such an ambitious dream survive in a country still dependent on agriculture and deforestation? Bolivia has a complicated relationship with its forests. Back in 2012, President Evo Morales introduced the Framework of Mother Earth Law, a groundbreaking policy that gave nature legal rights and supposedly protected forests from conversion. It sounded progressive on paper. The law proclaimed Bolivia's commitment to environmental protection and indigenous rights. But by 2019, the same government had issued decrees supporting the clearance of forest lands in the Chiquitano and Amazon regions for cattle and soybean production. The contradiction between policy and practice would prove devastating. It was a promise to protect nature broken by the very hands that made it. The result? A disaster that would define Bolivia's environmental future for decades to come. In August 2019, fires began spreading across the Chiquitano dry forest in Bolivia's Santa Cruz department. At first they seemed manageable. Regular pasture burning and agricultural expansion had always caused some fires in the region. Farmers had used fire for generations to clear land and prepare fields. But these weren't regular fires. Climate change had created hotter, drier conditions, and when international burns spiraled out of control, the flames consumed everything in their path. By early September 2019, over 1.2 million hectares had already burnt, roughly the size of Cyprus, including both forest and grassland. But the destruction didn't stop there. As the fires swept through Chiquitania, they consumed everything in their path. By the time the flames were finally extinguished, around 3.6 million hectares of land in Santa Cruz had been scorched, nearly 10% of the entire department. The Chiquitano forest holds special significance. It's the largest remaining tropical dry forest on Earth, home to unique species and indigenous communities who had protected it for generations. In just weeks, vast ecosystems turned to ash. But then, the 2019 fires sparked something in Bolivia. Citizens organized protests, conservation groups mobilized resources, and even government officials realized they couldn't let this happen again. Volunteers from across the country traveled to affected areas to fight fires and rescue animals. Donations poured in, and even foreign governments sent equipment and funding. Within weeks of the fires, President Morales announced reforestation plans and banned land sales in burnt areas to prevent profiteering. More importantly, local communities and international organizations started coordinating what would become one of South America's most ambitious restoration projects. The devastation revealed a troubling pattern. Between 2001 and 2021, over 24 million hectares in Bolivia had been impacted by wildfires, mainly in the departments of Beni and Santa Cruz. From 1976 to 2021, the country lost 8.6 million hectares of forest, equivalent to 14% of its total forest cover. At its peak, Bolivia lost roughly 400,000 hectares of forest each year. According to Global Forest Watch, it is now among the top 3 contributors to global forest loss. Only Brazil and the DRC register greater losses. Despite having less than half the primary forest of Indonesia, Bolivia was losing more. The fires also exposed a water crisis brewing beneath the surface. The Chiquitano dry forest sits between South America's 2 largest river basins, the Amazon and La Plata. These forests act as natural water towers, regulating rainfall and groundwater recharge for millions of people. When they burn, water security collapses. Agricultural expansion, cattle ranching, and inadequate infrastructure planning had already put immense pressure on surface and groundwater resources, and the fires made everything worse. This is where Bolivia's plan gets interesting. Instead of just planting trees, they decided to address the entire landscape. Water, soil, biodiversity, local communities, all of it needed to be restored together. The question was, could they actually pull it off? The government of Santa Cruz, working with Bolivia's national government, developed a restoration strategy targeting 1 million hectares of dry forest. This represented a commitment to transform an area roughly the size of Jamaica. The plan combines passive and active restoration, letting nature heal where it can and replanting where it can't. all while ensuring local communities benefit. It spans the Chiquitano, Chaco, and Pantanal regions, creating a vast mosaic of protected landscapes. One of the flagship initiatives is the Resilient Landscapes in Chiquitania project, which aims to improve water security for 70,000 to 120,000 people in vulnerable communities while making their livelihoods more resilient to climate change. The project supports 300 key actors across various sectors by strengthening their capacities for climate change adaptation, water security, and sustainable landscape management. They're managing 20,000 hectares of land sustainably through 5 pilot projects that test different restoration approaches. The restoration work happens on multiple fronts simultaneously. In the Monteverde territory, a project supported by the Eric Kaufeld Foundation originally aimed to restore 6,000 hectares by September 2024. The result exceeded all expectations. By the end of 2023, they had restored 13,863 hectares through reforestation and protection efforts, more than double the original target. The project's success was so significant that the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs allocated additional funding, allowing expansion from 2 indigenous villages of 10 villages. The restoration strategy includes 3 core components: planting native trees in severely damaged areas, preventing wildfires through fire breaks and awareness campaigns, and establishing agroforestry systems that combine agriculture with tree cover. Early reporting indicates that from 2021 to 2022, combined forest protection and fire prevention pilots may have reduced high-intensity fire zones by nearly 60%. Though long-term results remain to be verified, that's thousands of hectares saved from flames. But here's where the plan gets truly revolutionary. Although indigenous peoples represent only about 5% of humanity, studies suggest they steward up to 80% of the planet's remaining biodiversity. Research consistently shows that indigenous and traditional peoples are the best guardians of the world's forests. Bolivia recognized this fundamental truth and made indigenous communities central to its restoration strategy, rather than treating them as obstacles to progress. The Chiquitano people, who have inhabited the Monteverde territory covering 947,447 hectares for generations, now lead restoration efforts in their homeland. Villages established nurseries to breed native tree species that grew before the fires, carefully selecting varieties suitable for both reforestation and agroforestry. They chose species with both high timber value and biodiversity benefits, creating forests that serve multiple purposes. The approach emphasizes forest biodiversity to create the best conditions for animals, plants, and local communities alike. A survey conducted by ABCOB in 4 restored forest areas documented an impressive 99 species over just 60 kilometers, including 22 amphibians, 6 reptiles, 51 birds, and 20 medium to large animals. Wildlife was returning to areas that had been charred wasteland just years earlier. Protected areas across the Chiquitano have expanded dramatically. In just a few years, Bolivia added more than 1 million hectares of new protection, connecting once isolated forests into a single corridor of life. This growing network now stretches across roughly 4 million hectares, creating one of the largest continuous protected landscapes in South America. It's not just about trees, it's about giving an entire ecosystem a second chance. The Fuente de Vida Municipal Conservation Area, established in March 2024, protects 7,715 hectares and safeguards critical freshwater sources for over 2.4 million people living in Santa Cruz City and its metropolitan area. Water security and forest restoration go hand in hand. Scientific analysis shows the forest is fighting to recover. Over half of burned areas are already regenerating. It wants to come back. It just needs help. The challenges remain immense and unrelenting. Bolivia ranks 12th globally in biodiversity, containing 1,435 bird species, 382 mammal species, and 14,729 vascular plant species. Yet it continues losing hundreds of thousands of hectares annually. Government policy still promotes agricultural expansion, with weak enforcement of deforestation laws and incentives for land use change supporting biofuel production. The tension between economic development and environmental protection continues to shape Bolivia's trajectory. In 2024, widespread fires burned through previously intact forest, with the San Rafael municipality declaring a disaster situation in late July, after detecting over 2,000 fire hotspots. These fires mostly spared the protected area. The Chiquitano forest faces a grim reality across borders. The ecoregion occupies 25 million hectares across Bolivia, Brazil, and Paraguay, but Brazil's portion is almost completely replaced by crops and cattle pastures, and little remains in Paraguay. Bolivia holds the last substantial piece of this irreplaceable ecosystem. If Bolivia fails, the Chiquitano dry forest effectively disappears from Earth. Research warns that savannization is already taking place in both Brazil and Bolivia, with forests transitioning to degraded grasslands. The forest transition from woodland to savanna represents a tipping point that, once crossed, becomes irreversible. Climate projections indicate Bolivia will experience decreased precipitation, particularly during late winter and spring, and higher drought indices by 2050, with temperatures continuing to rise, making restoration even more difficult. Yet progress continues. The Department of Santa Cruz contains 78% of Bolivia's biodiversity and supports 70% of the country's agricultural production. Successful restoration here doesn't just save trees, it protects water sources, preserves species found nowhere else on Earth, and secures livelihoods for hundreds of thousands of people. Bolivia's plan demonstrates that turning drylands into green paradises requires more than just planting trees. It demands community engagement, fire prevention, water management, biodiversity protection, and sustainable economic alternatives. The scale is massive, the obstacles are real, but the alternative, watching one of the world's last great dry forests disappear completely, simply cannot be accepted. So do you believe Bolivia's restoration efforts can truly reverse decades of deforestation and fire damage? Let me know your opinion in the comments. And make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful stories about how nations are reimagining their landscapes.